The main cause of the Civil War was slavery. The Union and Confederacy were split based on their reliance on slaves. The northern states didn't believe in the use of slaves, whereas the South did. The Southerners then split off, forming the Confederate States of America as an act of rebellion. The North then tried to regain the states, and the Civil War broke out. Another cause of the war was the tariffs that favored the North, put forward by Andrew Jackson when South Carolina threatened to secede.
The northern states had many advantages during the Civil War. They had almost 4 times as many free citizens that could fight for them. They had many people to grow food and work in factories to make important supplies like weapons and railroad tracks so that they could move their supplies quicker. They had more than 70% of the nation's rail lines to move their troops around quicker, and they had a strong navy and a large fleet of private trading ships that they could use in battles when necessary. The South also had advantages, however, as they were defending on their homeland, and that gave them a strong reason to fight. And they had skilled officers, and they were some of the best in the United States. The northern states had 2 major disadvantages. They were unfamiliar with the land, so they didn't really know what they were doing. And they also had to conquer a huge area to bring the South back into the Union. The South had a few more disadvantages, however, as there were fewer factories to produce weapons, railroad tracks, and other supplies. And they had fewer railroads to move troops and vital supplies. The South had a small population. About 9 million lived in the Confederacy and 22 million lived in the Union, and more than a third of the population was enslaved, so those people could not fight.
The assassination of Lincoln was an event that took place in Washington, D.C. on April 14th, 1865. At 10:15, John Wilkes Booth came into Lincoln's booth and shot him in the back of the head. He then stabbed his bodyguard. After that, he ran onto the stage and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," or "Thus ever to tyrants," the Virginia state motto. At the time, this was thought to be all part of the show, but the First Lady's scream said otherwise. After hearing the scream, a doctor named Charles Leal came into the booth and found Lincoln slumped in his chair. The doctor concluded that he would not live through the night. Booth shot him because he was a white supremacist who despised Lincoln.
The Battle of Chickamauga took place in Chickamauga, Georgia, from September 19th to September 20th in 1863. It started shortly after dawn, where General Bragg's men gained ground on the Union, but could not break the line. At 11 p.m., however, General Longstreet's army arrived and gave the Confederacy a superior amount of troops. Bragg then split up the 2 armies into a 2-headed attack. The battle then resumed the next day at 9:30 a.m. with coordinated Confederate attacks to the Union's left flank. A little while later, Rosecrans believed there was a gap in the Confederate line and left a wide open hole in his line, which the Confederates took advantage of. The Confederacy then won the battle and the Union retreated back. Some of the facts from the battle were there was 125,000 soldiers total. 60,000 of those were Union and the other 65,000 were Confederate. There were a total of 34,624 casualties. On the Union side, there was only 1,657 killed. However, 9,756 were wounded and 4,757 were missing or captured. And that's 16,170 in total. On the Confederate side, there was 2,312 killed, 14,674 wounded, 1,468 missing or captured, which comes out to 18,454 total. The commanders were William S. Rosecrans for the Union and Braxton Bragg for the Confederacy.
Robert E. Lee was the leading officer of the Confederacy. He was offered a job from Abraham Lincoln to be the leader of the Union, but he declined, stating that he couldn't fight against his own people. Before that, he was a war hero in the Revolutionary War in Stratford Hall, Virginia. He would go on to graduate from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 1829. His first military engagement occurred at Cheat Mountain in Virginia on September 11th, 1861. Although it was a Union victory, his reputation with withstood the intense public criticism that would soon follow. He then served as military advisor to Confederate President Jefferson Davis in 1862. Robert commanded his army through Northern Virginia. He then pushed forward, battling in Antietam, Maryland on September 17th, 1862, one of the bloodiest battles of the war. He then spent the rest of the year defending Union attacks. He then made a massive push towards the center of General George E. Pickett, assuming that they would fall back, but they didn't budge, and he was forced to retreat.
Jefferson Davis was the only president of the Confederate States of America. Born in Kentucky and raised in Mississippi, Davis was a politician, a soldier, and a planter. After he attended a college in Kentucky, he entered into the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 1824. In 1832, he served in the Black Hawk War briefly. 13 years later, in 1845, Davis was sent by Mississippi into the U.S. House of Representatives. He resigned a year later so he could fight the Mexican War. In 1853, Davis was appointed by Franklin Pierce, the U.S. Secretary of War. A month after Davis withdrew from the Senate in 1861, he was selected by Alabama and became the provisional president of the Confederacy. He was a popular president in the South, however, he was not fit for the job. On May 10, 1865, Northern soldiers captured Confederate President. Jefferson Davis was sent to jail for 2 years, but was released in May 1867. When he was released, he spent time with his family and retired, but then died on December 6, 1889.
In war, the flag has always been very important. The flags gave the soldiers a rallying point in the Civil War during battle. What they could do is identify a person as a friend or an enemy. During the Civil War, the Union flag didn't go through many changes. The U.S. officially didn't lose any stars. However, unofficially, many flags were made with stars removed. This represented the Confederate States seceding from the Union. When Lincoln became president in 1861, the Civil War Union flag had 33 stars. On July 4th in the same year, a new star was added. This was for the state of Kansas. During its short time as the official government of the South, the Confederacy used 3 different flags. In 1863, the first flag named Stars and Bars was replaced.
Black codes were restrictions set on African Americans. These codes forced them into a virtual state of slavery. They segregated them from all activities that white people performed. The blacks had to stand on a bus instead of sitting if a white person came on. They had to drink out of different watered fountains especially made for colored people. They had to go to different schools as well and not get paid for the hard work they did. Congress tried to reconstruct these unconstitutional laws and make them more fair, but their efforts were destroyed by white supremacist groups such as the Ku Klux Klan. These laws were soon passed over and the codes stayed.
No one really won the Civil War. The Union simply regained the states that seceded back after suffering heavy casualties. If the Confederacy won, they would have become their own country. The only real victors of the war were slaves. They gained a massive step towards freedom by the Confederacy losing.